Morning, everyone. I'm Professor Strange. You can call me Strange or Corey. And today we're asking the question, what builds a society? And I want you to think about that as broadly as you can and as specifically as you can. We're discussing medieval times, and as a way of connecting it to what you learned last year, I want to start with a brief refresher, and we're going to jump right into how it connects with our subject. If you remember, Rome was trucking along. We call this 0 AD. Rome as an empire was cruising along. And what else happened about 0 AD? Why do we use that frame of reference? Because that's when Jesus was born. And then what happened about AD 33? That's right. And what happened after Jesus died and was resurrected? That's right, the church was started. And we have a slow incremental increase in the number of Christians in the world. There were missionaries, people were joining the church, and it was growing. Rome is doing its thing, and down here we have Christianity slowly increasing. And what was special about Rome? Why did it become such a powerful superpower in the world? It introduced things like armies, which were not necessarily new, but organized in a larger scale. Speaking of scale, we have these scales. What do those represent? Good job, that's laws. And you might call that war. And what else? Good. Religion. And they built roads. Good job. Has anybody seen a Roman road in person? They still exist. They built settlements. I used to live in Scotland, and there's still Roman walls that exist in the town. And of course, who held all these things together? Does anybody remember the laurel wreath? What does that symbolize? That's right. How do we spell Caesar? So we have a person that's kind of holding all the empire together, right? And the person who held this together is now gone. But interestingly, it continues to grow. That's very unusual for organizations. What happens along the way here? We start to see Christianity gaining a foothold. We start to see some persecutions happening, Christians being martyred. Not all the time, and it's not everywhere, but it is definitely a thing that is happening about that time. And around 313, something very special happens that counteracts this. Christianity becomes legal in the empire. That's a huge deal because that means Christians won't be persecuted and the religion can spread more freely without being squashed down by the government, right? Very, very important. And then just 67 years later, at 380, not only is it becoming legal, but now it becomes the official, that Christianity is officially the religion of the Roman Empire. It's replacing the pantheon of gods, and now it's all under Christianity. Huge, Huge deal. Now what happens is we start to see a lot more increase. Each one of these, it's like a little bit more. And does anybody remember what happens in 476? Rome is going along. 476 happens, and what? Good job. This is what we call the fall of Rome. Huge deal, because Rome was the central superpower in the Western world, and suddenly it collapses. What do you think would happen if suddenly America collapsed right now? Huge deal, right? Would that necessarily end the roads or religion? It might end the laws, especially in a larger scale. Things would become more isolated. Your town or your community, your city, would become more of a little pocket inside other things, and things fractured in Rome. So we're going along more or less unified, and it just splinters, kind of like glass in a way, fractures, breaks. And a lot of these things start to dissolve that require organization at high levels. And if you're familiar with the difference between a federal government versus state or local community governments, it would be like America as a federal government fracturing, dissolving, and we're left with more state or community even. So there's a lot of bad things that happen from here, while there's this thing starting to emerge. And what are some central ideas you find in Christianity? Maybe you've experienced some of these things on your own. Good. Love is very important in Christianity. That love can also bring about trust and friendship, families, right? And these are things that kind of carry a civilization through. These are things that help unite us as people, more so than roads do, right? You can have a road, as they did at this time, but if you don't have love or trust, that road becomes a place for bandits and robbers and people that want to kill you and take your money. So we can have this thing, but if we don't have this thing, then it's bad news. But conversely, can we have this thing and not have this thing? Does that build a society? What do you think? I like the direction you're going, because these things do carry a civilization, but what builds a society in some ways is the same as what sustains society, but they can also be different things. So Christianity was for 300 years not supported by the government. That means it was not sustained as a society, but it was building kind of its own society underneath and within that larger society. That's why I put it on a different timeline underneath, because it starts lower. They were lower class citizens. They were being killed off. But now that Rome is gone, what we have is this interesting kind of inverse where Rome goes down and Christianity starts to come up. So when this fracturing happens and we're left without, say, police forces, that's an interesting thing to consider. If America, federal government, was suddenly dissolved, what would that say about our police force? What would that do to the police force? How would it change your life? What if there was no fire department where you lived? What if there was no hospital active? These are things that larger governments put in place for the citizens that we benefit from, that help to sustain a society. a question we might ask here, we're just going to touch on very briefly, but I want to engage more deeply over the course of the semester. What is it that builds a society in this example? What helps build Christianity to become a force that can, in some ways, take over from the government? You don't need to answer that, but I think it's really important, and I want to examine it further when we have more time. So what happens here? Rome is falling, Christianity is ascending. More and more people are part of that community, even while it fractures. And as some of your answers suggest, Christianity can become a unifying force. Unity. We might even use that as a substitution for the word society. Societies require unity to be cohesive and to sustain and to build. Otherwise, the opposite of that is anarchy, which is disastrous for everybody. So are we seeing a little bit more clearly how Rome, that you learned about last semester, is continuing here? This is kind of where your story ended last semester, and this is how it continued forward, and how Christianity is now rising and interacting, and there's this dynamic relationship happening between the government, more the external government and laws that are imposing itself onto the citizens, and Christianity, which is more emerging from the center of an individual and reaching out towards larger, excuse me, I don't know why it does that. And while it's building, ascending here, we see this interesting phenomenon. Things are getting smaller and more fractured, and we start to see the emergence. What does that kind of look like? That's a quickly drawn poor castle, but instead of a tower behind here like you'd see at Disneyland, what we would expect to see in medieval times is something more like this. This is what we call a monastery. Why does it have walls like this? Like a castle? What does it make you think of? Why does it have that shape? Right. So this shape is specifically made for men with bows and arrows and other weapons standing up here to defend against mobs of angry people that are coming to attack. And they're shooting things. They want to take all the food and kill all the people. And the monastery builds walls around itself to protect itself and the people inside of it. So we have this list here that Rome was really great at doing. We don't have an army necessarily. It would be ordinary citizens coming together. But this is where we have books. It will come around later than this semester, but monasteries are where the priests would copy manuscripts, and so much of the history we have from the ancient world, including Rome, is because of the preservation of the priests in the monasteries. Of course, they were the guardians of religion, only instead of a pantheon of gods, now we have Christianity is the dominant religion, right? They do help sometimes in maintaining roads, that kind of thing, but they're especially good at gardening, planting, cultivation, even livestock. The reason that we have fertilizer in our farms right now is because priests in the monastery not only, well, they probably had the tradition before, but they wrote it down so that that knowledge could spread abroad. And how we have chickens in the fields eating the bugs and fertilizing the plants. We have monastic documents that discuss that kind of thing. And also they preserve art and architecture, and society as a general continues on. After the collapse and fragmentation of Rome, we have Christianity taking up that mantle, and largely through the monasteries, and then eventually through larger buildings, cathedrals, pilgrimage, all sorts of things start coming into play. And Christianity ascends and continues to replace the empire of Rome and becomes the bastion of culture and civilization. For about 1,000 years, the conversation of what builds a society will slowly transition to what sustains a society. And it is a natural progression of the conversation started in Greece about the true, the good, and the beautiful. And it applies it through Christianity into not only art and architecture, but also through politics and civilization building. And I want you to think as we go forward in this semester, are we a society in this classroom? Not quite a family, but a school society is in that same vein, that there's relationships happening. There's relationships among each of you and your teachers and within yourself. You are a society as an individual. And we're going to unpack these questions over the course of this semester. What builds a society and what sustains a society? Are those the same thing? Are they different things? Are they complementary or opposite? Does one undo the other? I won't answer that question right now because we're going to take the time in the semester to unpack that. Questions, comments? Great. Thank you.